Vayse, a podcast about weird stuff. I'm Peter C. Hine, and joining me as always is my old friend, co-host, and an absolute Dharma queen. He walks the middle path between weird and very weird, and he's currently keeping busy by going through endless cycles of birth and death and rebirth, only to find that in every incarnation he ends up co-hosting a podcast about weird stuff with me. He's the man who literally introduced me to Nirvana and Green Day. It's Mr. Stephen James Buckley.
Wow, that was the best one yet, I think. I say that every time, and then I say that every time as well. I need to work on a response to your introductions to me, but the problem is I don't know what they're going to be. And by the time they hit me, I'm just so blown away. And that one in particular had references to 90s alternative rock in it, so I'm just, wow, thank you.
So, our guest tonight trained for years as a Buddhist monk in the Tibetan tradition. He's an accredited therapist and leads meditation retreats here in the north of England, so hopefully he can bring some much-needed peace of mind to the Vayse Institute of Overthinking and Catastrophic Worry. It's Mr. Roger Jayamanne. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
To get into this, let's talk a little bit about your past and how you came into this tradition and what first got you started on this path. So what was your introduction to Buddhism?
Okay, so it's a really tricky question to answer because there's many points in my life where I could say that's where it began. So what I mean by that is when I grew up, my next door neighbor was a real, devotee, I suppose, of a famous Tibetan teacher around in the 70s. It's so much so that she had them living in her house. So that was my next door neighbor, right? So, in a semi-detached in, suburban London. So I grew up with someone in my life who already made me aware of the Buddha, already made me aware of meditation in a, not in a really heavy way, just was aware of it. I was always aware of it as an infant.
How old were you at that point?
I was 3 when we moved.
Right, okay, there. So that's really early then.
So, yeah. But I don't want to overstate that. It wasn't like a huge part of my life, anything like that. It was just there. And my father's from Sri Lanka, so we also had, Sri Lankan imagery of batiks and various, ornamental kind of things on walls and on shelves and things that would also have some Buddhist imagery as well. So there was that sort of awareness. And then you can pretty much fast forward to when I was a teenager, sort of early teens. I started reading a lot of Jung. I was very interested in, I wasn't so much interested in dreams per se. It was much more the unconscious and the archetypes. Obviously, there was a dream factor to that, to which led me to reading a neurology book. I think it was definitely about the brain, so it had neurological aspects to it. And the last chapter had chapter on the kind of the concept in Tibetan Buddhism, especially. My point being that it was talking about the reflection of dreams and not just dreams, but falling asleep and falling into unconsciousness as a kind of microcosmic process that reflected the death process. So what's called in Tibetan was Bardo. Bardo just means the place in between. But it's now usually referred to, if someone says the Bardo, they're usually referring to the point between death and rebirth.
Yeah.
So I read that chapter and it was like reading, I'd say it's pretty much the same feeling I'm sure some people would have, where you read an old letter that you wrote to a friend or an old diary entry from when you were like a kid or something, and you suddenly kind of, it's just very familiar and a lot of things come back, a lot of resonances and feelings come back. And so when I read that, it was almost like I was reading something I'd written. Like, that's the only way I could explain that, really.
Was that due, do you think, to your early experiences with your neighbour, or do you think this is something more sort of deep and innate?
I'll go much more with the deep and innate thing. I mean, obviously, from a Buddhist perspective, it's going to be a karmic thing, right?
And do you think that was a similar Was it a similar feeling to the experience of deja vu, or was it different?
I'd say for me, deja vu is there's more ambiguity to it, whereas that feeling was more really like finding an old toy that you've forgotten about.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mean that in a trivial sense. I mean, in the sense of, oh yeah, of course, I've forgotten that, but of course. And in the same way that you would find something like that, you always kind of knew it, but you'd just forgotten. It wasn't that it wasn't like I was learning. And that was the main feeling, was that I was not learning it. It didn't feel like I was learning it. It was more like, oh yeah, a bit like someone sort of re-explaining soccer toe and trigonometry or something. It was like, oh yeah, of course, yeah, totally forgot about that.
I was just wondering, is it, obviously there's the word deja vu, and it's kind of quite a well-known thing. Is what you're describing something which other people have experienced, but with reading texts like
similarly,
this, or
kind
just
of stuff,
in general?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say similar things.
I've had this experience probably most when meeting people. When you've got the feeling that you've met them before, when you know that you probably haven't.
Yeah, and I think that the phrase "the proof's in the pudding" in many ways is: does it affect you? Does that? You can kind of claim that something's really affecting you or hit you in a very profound way. Is it still doing that 30 years later? And I can say yes.
So you think that reading that chapter and having that feeling kind of set you on the path that you've taken for the rest of your life?
I would say so, because what happened from there was I absolutely devoured anything I could get my hands on in terms of Buddhism. I was only a kid, and this is 1990, right? So I mean, we're just talking public libraries, we're not talking internet. So I was trawling through. I just remember every bookshop and every library I go into, every book I open, I'd go to the index, look up B for Buddhism, D for Dharma. I pretty much went it alone for 3 or 4 years until I was 19, so 4 years. And then I got connected with a Nyingma group. And Nyingma is one of the 4 main traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, the 4 main schools. And so spent a lot of time with them. I mean, I don't mean in terms of just duration. I mean actually sort of retreats and doing quite solitary retreats. And I'd say at 19 was when I really started to practice. I think before that, I was just gathering as much things together as I could in terms of knowledge. And, I'd say what I would now call dabbling in meditation. I didn't really know what I was doing, I think, to some extent.
Yeah. And when you're talking about these retreats that you were attending, what kind of things were done at the retreats?
Well, it very much depends on what the general program. I mean, sometimes retreats can involve teachings. You sit and you receive a certain type of teachings, and then there might be some instructions and practices that are transmitted. I mean, this is esoteric, but this is really pretty much the idea that there's some transmission that goes from mind to mind. Like their experience of realized mind contacts something in you, plants a seeds. Potentially something very profound's happened. Now, of course, I'm not a pious Buddhist, so I'm perfectly aware and acknowledge the fact there's other aspects to that could be implicated, as in the power of, to put it in a sort of English vernacular, power of the priesthood and what they hold and what they offer. You can't do this until you come through me. So I'm quite sure, there is some aspects in terms of social engineering or whatever you want to call it. However, there is a difference to that, which is in Tibetan Buddhism, if you go for that ceremony, and you do get that Wanglung. You can disappear back to your yurt, on the Tibetan plateau, and never show your face again.
Yeah.
So you could say that in a broad way, they're maintaining that authority and that kind of agency, but in another way, it's far more permissive once you've received it.
And did you train as a monk in any of these traditions?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the Nyingma tradition that I was connected with originally, it was what's called a householder tradition. So there are monks and nuns in the Nyingma tradition. The specific tradition I was involved with was householders. So that was when I was sort of 19, 20 that I got them. And then my monk life started in what's Kagyu tradition. So yeah, 26 as a monk. And 2001, 2001/2. And the thing is that the reason I'm confused about when it was is because there's when did you take your vows? When did you go into robes? They're two different things. I took vows probably 6 months, 7 months before I sort of, had my head shaved and wore the robes.
Yeah.
And then I that was within a monastery itself. But then after that, I went into what's called a closed retreat, as in there's just a handful of mugs, and it was shut. There was no one coming in, no one going out. We had cooks and some assistants that would do some things, but we didn't see them. We never saw them. It was literally a hatch where the food would be put through, and by the time we came to get the food, and there anymore.
And what benefit do you think that would have to a person, or what benefit did it have to you? That kind of isolation and that kind of, environment.
I think, to me, I think a lot of the benefit does come from the isolation. This is me speaking, and I felt that as well when I did solitary retreats beforehand. I did a few solitary retreats in my 20s as well. I think to kind of one perspective you could say that's defining Buddhism, and especially those schools of Buddhism, is that the perspective is what you're looking for is in your mind streams, in a sense. That's one way of talking about it. It's there. It's not. You're not making something happen. You're not even cultivating it. The task, the challenge, is to find what's there. It's not to make it, which is counter to some ideas about meditation. It's the Buddha nature. So the nature of mind and the nature of everyone's mind is that it's Buddha. And that doesn't mean it's an Indian guy from 2,500 years ago sitting inside your head. It's that he woke up to it. The Buddha means awake, awakened. So it's not that he founded or generated it. It's that he saw the true nature, and I use the term the true nature because it's not just the nature of our mind, it's the nature of all phenomena. It's a non-dualistic philosophy. It's not that we're of different nature than phenomena. All phenomena has true nature, which is limitless, infinite.
So for our listeners who may have no experience of this at all, what is Buddhism generally? How would you characterize it?
Okay, so I'll mix it up with what I would say is scholarly terms, and then more sort of analogy, just to make it a bit more accelerated kind of description. So Buddhism is what's called a dharmic religion. So dharma means the way, and it means the way in the sense of a path, but it also means the way things are as well. So phenomena can also be referred to as dharma, and it is a religion. Yeah. It's not just a philosophy. Like, I know people like to say that. I tell you, anyone who's actually got into it, it's definitely a religion. I mean, anything that talks about what happens to you after you die is a religion. I mean, I'd say that's pretty much I know that there's I think the technical term is that, it has to have a Godhead. I think that's a bit more of an old, a less sort of globalized modern world made that definition. Nowadays, I'd say if they're telling you what's going to happen to you after you die in some form or another, that's religion.
Yeah.
So Buddhism is dharmic religion, teaches that the path to your fully realized awakening and realization to the deepest reality is essentially down to you understanding your own mind. So it's not to do with external salvation. It's not to do with... There is a conduct aspect to it, of course, and that, again, that's like the public face of Buddhism, right livelihood, right... there's all sorts of things like right livelihood, right action, etc., etc. Now, that's all a description of living a good life. That's how to hone your life and your conduct and your mind to a point where you're not accruing too much bad karma, and it's supposed to be conducive to meditation. It's conducive to creating a peaceful life. Because I think the Buddha was, a very good psychologist, you could say, in some ways. So he understood that if you've got all sorts of discord in your life, including aspects of our mind to do with feelings of guilt or feelings of, kind of anxiety over something we have done or not done enough, or etc., then that's going to impede on when you sit down to try and meditate. That's going to be affecting you. So, I think from the Theravadan point of view of Buddhism, that's big, I'd say emphasis is upon living your life very clear way with a clear set of morals and conduct. Whereas Vajrayana is not so much like it doesn't say you can do what you like, but it's more it's more concerned with what's your internal experience. It's honing your internal experience. Probably, I'd be so bold as to say probably over and above your conduct. So there are quite a lot of controversial figures in Vajrayana Buddhism. The other thing to say that defines certainly between those two schools is that Theravadan Buddhism's really got this perspective on it that you're going to be working at this for a long time. Many, 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 many lifetimes. Whereas Vajrayana is, you've got the Buddha nature. You need to wake up. And so there's this sort of traditional number of lifetimes that's often described, which is 16, which is that if you get on the path, 16 lifetimes, you cracked it. Now, there's one caveat in that, which is a major caveat, which is if you screw up, you royally screw up. So, I mean, a good analogy, and it's a literal analogy here, is that you know the game Snakes and Ladders that I suppose most people will be familiar with if they're in an English-speaking.
Yeah.
Snakes and Ladders comes from India, and it's a Buddhist representation of the dynamics of rebirth.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So trying to get to the end without sliding down a snake, which is basically screwing up in some way, and going back to the realms. So there's a Tibetan game which is very similar, which is much more literal. It describes each square gets a description, and it's a description of the different types of rebirth and the types of perception that come with that. So you'll see water as a fiery, acidy poison, and so like all these different ways of experiencing things in the realm of samsara, which is the realm of, samsara, going around in circles, pretty much. But the implication is that what's happening. People are not recognizing true nature. So throughout their infinite lifetimes, they're screwing up over and over again, falling back down, sliding back down the snake.
What is the end game for that then? So you go through your 16 lives, and if you don't royally screw it up and slide down the snake at the end, what comes after those 16 lives?
It's a good question, because that's often a question that's asked, right? Well, okay, well, and that's part of our way we think about things, right? Well, what about what's next?
Yeah.
It's a bit of an unsatisfactory answer to that, which is there's one perspective which is, well, it's your true nature, so you realize it, right? So that's obviously and that's said as the ultimate destiny of all beings is to become Buddha, because there's no other aspect of their being that is truly them. So everything else is going to fall away. So over time, there's only one direction you can go in. It's what you are. There's also something called Trinlay, right? Trinlay means Buddha karma. Buddha karma means, rather than you having your personal karma in a sense, it's the function and the dynamic of Buddha nature. It acts and responds with compassion and wisdom. So that means that instead of you having your own personal karma, you go where beings need you. So that's including all dimensions and all realms. And so if you look at a lot of these traditional what are called Thangka paintings, you'll see different realms, you often see this 6-realmed circle, and it looks like a big demon's holding it. And that's like the wheel, what's called the wheel of life. And that's representative, and it shows you different realms of existence, like hell realms, animal realms, human realms, God realms. And in those, there'll be a representation of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is like a very highly realized being that's on the path to Buddhahood. Like, when I say highly realized, I mean manifesting in 100,000 different dimensions. Like, they're just pretty cool. They really can for it.
It's like reminds me of what are them people that Alan Greenfield always goes on about?
The Ascended Masters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Similar principle, sort of almost like they've almost reached the level of like full enlightenment almost, and so are able to help other people who are less far along that path.
And that idea is that they're being drawn by the force of compassion, rather than them going, what shall I have to say? It's more to do with where the need is, and it's said that they'll manifest. It's almost that's the way it is, kind of thing. They'll manifest where they're needed. A bit like fungi will manifest where it's there. That's a terrible analogy, but it's like it's almost like the potential is always there, anywhere where there's beings, where there's mind, that it will come out almost like a sort of remedial response to suffering. It's the idea.
It's a nice thought.
Yeah.
It just strikes me that compared to some other religions, and mainly, of course, I'm talking about Christianity here, which is where my principal experience is, it seems a lot less grasping, where in Christianity there's this whole idea that you've got to live a very certain way, you've got to do certain things in order to gain access to heaven, which is some sort of paradise, and that's just kind of where you end up and just have a great time for the rest of eternity, I guess. I know I'm oversimplifying things there, but there's a lot less of this emphasis and this connection between the peaceful life and the compassion at the end of being able to help people when you do go through whatever you have to go through, that then you become something that then helps others to do the same, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's got a kind of a very strong pedagogical kind of aspect. Like you learn, then you pass it down to the next. So and that is literally in the tradition as well in terms of teacher and student. The lineage of Buddhism that's said to be authentic, genuine, should be able to trace its line back to the Buddha, to the disciple Buddha. So it's very different than, for instance, if you think about places like, I don't know, in the Bible Belt or something in the southern states, where someone can sort of say, I've seen the light, well, that doesn't really happen in Buddhism in the same way, and so because there's this kind of very strict emphasis on the lineage and the teacher-student relationship. And that's how those practices and that's how that tradition maintains itself.
Could I, as a sort of learning exercise for myself and also hopefully for our listeners, could I ask a few sort of cliched questions about Buddhism? And some of these I've actually asked you before, so you'll know what you're getting. So that to try to either dispel some of these myths or to claim that they're correct. So, who is the Buddha? Were they a historical figure that we have proof of, like Jesus, or is it something less material than that?
Okay, so there are different perspectives on that, and I don't mean that necessarily in that one's true and one isn't. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So, for instance, there is one perspective that he was a human being, that he suffered in human ways, that he was a human being who was born into extreme opulence and power and, opportunities, to the point where he'd almost exhausted all of those opportunities and experiences and still not gained satisfaction. So that's one perspective, is that he's an example of someone who at that time, in that place, he was described as essentially having everything you could possibly desire, and yet it didn't quite hit the mark for him. There was still some empty experience that he was having, and that's what really propelled him to renounce everything and disappear off into the forest to meditate for years on it. So, like, there's that perspective. There's another perspective that he was enlightened from day one, and as he stepped, lotus flowers grew in his footsteps, and that he was already a Buddha from that time, and that he was simply there to teach. You could even go into sort of Hinduism. So, for instance, the Buddha, from the point of view of Vishnu, who incarnated in many forms, in some sects of Hinduism, they see Buddha as one of the incarnations of Vishnu, the ninth, I believe. So there's many ways of looking at Buddha, and one of them is that he was a prince in modern day Nepal who'd had enough of hedonism, and it just wasn't doing it, and that he had some sense that there was something deeper, something more meaningful to experience in his own life. Now, of course, there's controversy to that as well, because he left his wife and his newly born child. So that's not something that is. If you tell the story of the Buddha from that, emphasizing that point, then everyone would just think that he's some sort of, chauvinist that couldn't be bothered to commit to a family and just ran off into the forest. And I've heard people have said that to me. People said that to me when I was a monk. He just couldn't cope with your family life.
Yeah, I think people have that tendency, don't they, to kind of almost put like a modern framework on something which is it's not. You can't apply that to it because it's
it doesn't make
totally
sense.
Different, isn't it? It's not like that's not the point of the story.
No,
it's not. You're looking at it from the wrong angle there.
Yeah, and also from someone that was in his position, that doesn't make sense anyway. He was destined to be the king of that, of the Shakya clan, which was a huge area of India. He's not really going to be worrying about whether he can sort of pay his council tax. It wasn't like he'd have mundane concerns. And to be frank, he probably wouldn't have even had that much to do with, family life in that way. He would have been too busy training for his role. But yeah, of course, that's the other perspective, is that his life has just a mythological punch to it. It's symbolic of the journey of each person because there's these three stages he went through when he left his palace for the first time in his life, where he encountered old age, sickness, and death, and his father, so the story goes, kept all of those experiences away from him. So there were no old people that worked there. He was never told about death. There were no people sick that were allowed to be around him ever. Now you could analyze that and go, well, that's ridiculous. Everyone gets a cold or whatever. He must have experienced it. In another way, it's like, well, that's got a mythological point to it, which is that he just was mollycoddled basically into a position where he didn't really experience suffering to any significant. And it was only when he got out of the confines of his palace that he encountered the real kind of human dukkha, suffering. I think to me, I always find it interesting that was a walled city, right? And paradise literally translates, Eden translates as the walled garden. And there's something about that, the loss of innocence, to break through what seemed like your world, what seemed like and then you encounter true suffering. Once you've witnessed it, you cannot.
Me and Hine have talked before about how across a number of different things there seems to be this idea of kind of almost breaking out of your comfort zone, breaking out of your structure in order to grow. And this seems just like another example of that, which is, it's frankly terrifying, and I hate the idea. But it is. I suspect there's there really is something to that. It's one of them ideas where, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, it's not just me, where you love the idea of it in theory, but in practice it's absolutely terrifying. And
yes,
kind
and
of,
should
I think
be,
that's,
in a way.
Yeah, because then it wouldn't have the effect. But it's one of them things where I feel like with what limited understanding I have of Buddhism and particularly kind of meditation as well, kind of it's one of these things where sort of Western secular 21st century people are just catching up to it. Like, as in, there's a lot of things now that people advise or that are talked about or that, are kind of even commonplace, like how meditation, even in the last sort of 20, 30 years, meditation, yoga,
meditation, mindfulness.
Yeah. And it's like,
it almost kind of takes the spirituality out of it when in reality it's evolved from a spiritual tradition.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the West likes to sort of think that it's got this sort of ability to be mechanistic about these things and just sort of reduce it down to its active principles and take the lineage, take the heart out and just go, just do this,
Yeah.
I'd say that there's a very famous figure around in the public nowadays who does that, like he's kind of like, he's putting on his own sort of flavor of meditation and kind of saying, you don't need to believe in all that sort of Buddhist stuff. But I think, that encountering with suffering is I'd say it's universal, really, because if you think about, that's the shamanic initiation as well, right? I mean, there's many traditions where that young lad gets woken up in the middle of the night, sleeping with his younger siblings and his mum, and is dragged out by men in masks and beaten up. Yeah, and then he fights and has to go through that, absolutely terrifying struggle. And I think and this is the crossover, I would say, with therapy in Buddhism and that type of tradition, is that really, the challenge is to encounter uncertainty, the realm of uncertainty and your relationship with uncertainty, and start to find a way to navigate that world rather than under the mother's wing, to put it in a kind of, figurative. I mean, so much therapeutic process pointing out that, someone's approach, someone's lifestyle, someone's way of thinking is all about maintaining hold on certainty. And, along with that, you could use terms like control and, the familiar.
Yeah, literally my entire life, basically. You've just been describing me for a couple of minutes and I'm starting to feel uncomfortable.
I mean, a lot of, again, the Western life is about this fixed, almost routine and the illusion of control and the illusion of certainty. You do one thing, another thing happens. When we know from living life, just from the experience we have of life, that it is pretty much pure uncertainty.
Yes.
There's certain things that you think will probably happen, but mainly every day you have to contend with an element of uncertainty. And I think that the way that Western life, I just don't think it prepares us for this properly at all. I think that everything is about this set result. And I think that's a reason why so many people find uncertainty so scary.
Yes. And I think that's, like you say, it's coming about from kind of an old school Cartesian mechanistic sort of perspective on things that is deterministic. If I have enough information, I can work out what's going to happen or what to do to control this. Whereas, I think that a lot of the Eastern traditions are about, and to be fair, I think that in whatever we term as Western traditions, I mean, even what we usually term as Western traditions, kind of Eastern or Middle Eastern or something. But I think that when we had the scientific revolution, obviously what was communicated and what was assumed, even if it wasn't being communicated by some of those scientists, was we can work it all out. We found the key here. We don't need that religion stuff. We don't. Uncertainty is just a matter of time, and we'll have this all nailed. And when you remove what I would say is a place marker or a representative place marker for uncertainty and the unknown, i.e. God at the time, and say, no, that's not there. That's not going to help you. We are literally just in a chaotic universe, and all we've got are some of these kind of limited understandings of physics and biology, etc. Then actually that just throws people into utter chaos and oblivion in many ways.
It always amuses me when science looks at that and you get things like chaos theory, which is basically saying, that yes, you can start out with predictable elements, but things will descend slowly into disorder and chaos. But don't worry about that, because that's just chaos theory. We've got it solved. That's science.
We've given it a name.
Yeah, we've given it a name, so exactly. That's okay.
Yeah.
But do you think, Roger, that perhaps we could get to a stage in sort of Western secular life where it almost kind of comes back round to being more spiritual and to being more in line with that way of thinking? I think it would be good.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it would be good. Yeah. I think the hump to get over is the sort of mechanistic reductionist idea. Now, the problem, concept and approach. Now, the problem with it is that it works for those things. So if I want to build a shuttle, if I want to build the most efficient car or whatever, then I need to refer to that type of, scientific, whatever you want to call it, perspective. But when we're talking about, I would say, broadly speaking, the mind, that those sorts of, because often what comes with that is a binary type of thinking, like a removal of nuance and a removal of uncertainty. Now, that also comes with a devaluation of aspects of our mind that's connected with intuition. And, we could term it as the fall of the goddess, etc. Like anything that is seen as not very much kind of nailed down with facts and number and measure, and it's kind of like devalued and dismissed. And I think that the revolution is going to come through revaluation and appreciation of, from a neurological point of view, I would say the right hemisphere of the brain, right? The part of us that's responsible for understanding context and relationship and the whole kind of gestalt, rather than an eye for detail and control and writing things down in a systemized way. But that will only come through, I would say the tricky part of that is that tends to only really come through each individual's path. It's not really something that you can kind of, if you try and enforce that or make people have that experience, you've just gone back into the left hemisphere and trying to control everything. So it has to be. Yeah, it really is. I think you're always dealing in paradox when you start to talk about things that are an essential nature or the mind and spiritual subject matter.
Yeah, it's like the whole idea that in some cultures there's not like a clear difference between what's dreamed and what's real. I say that in scare quotes. It's like, but nowadays, and certainly it's very much like the idea of fantasy and imagination and dreams are over there and they're not real and they're not relevant. And then what we see in the supposedly real world is, and I think that like you say, it's that blurring between the boundaries actually could end up becoming beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, it's all that was just a dream, or that's a figment of your imagination, or you're just imagining things. Really dismissive ways of discussing what is such a huge part of our internal lives.
Roger, what do you think dreams are? Do you have some thoughts on dreams and their importance? Or
I think we're in a more receptive mind state when we're dreaming. So it's not to say that there aren't aspects, psychology and subjective experience that are informing those. So of course, the content of them will be, you could call psychologically, ascertained. You could possibly work out what's going on with analysis. However, I also think that there is, the realm of the archetypes, the intuitive dimensions, etc., are also affecting it. They're not simply, it's not the tape playing itself back over and over again through, various permutations and combinations of experiences that we've had. There can potentially be other things that come in, and that will include things like precognition or, shared dreams as well. That's definitely a thing that I've experienced with people. Our minds aren't as separate as we think they are. I'd say that is also something that's come out of my experiences. Say actually that comes out of my experiences with therapy as much as meditation. Like when you're really sitting with someone and really focused with them, they'll say things or you'll say things, and that's just exactly what they were thinking, or images start to be transmitted without you actually kind of verbalizing it, or at least they get confirmed after they've been transmitted. So dreams, I would say, is they're a manifestation of psychology mixed with supernatural phenomena.
Yeah, I guess by their very nature, it's almost like a trick question, because it's almost like by their very nature, you shouldn't be able to describe them, because it's like I'm trying to think of a way to word this. It's like
they're in the realm of the indescribable, aren't they?
Yeah, and you just almost kind of need to not impose too much of a structure on what they are, and just try and almost in terms of deciphering them, it's almost like you shouldn't try and decipher them exactly. It's more just like a feeling.
Grasping them too hard is going to choke them.
Yeah. It's like watching a David Lynch film and trying to apply an analysis as you would reading a story or watching a more linear film or whatever. There are some pieces of art which are to be experienced through intuition.
Yeah, like sort of ineffable.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of like a Tarkovsky kind of, you just... what can you say?
Yeah. It's just like some things almost that you've just got to kind of feel them on that level. And I feel like that's something which is massively underrated. And yet some of what you're saying in terms of that, the way that you're describing the more various things that you said tonight, are kind of bringing me back to that approach to things, not just to dreams or to films, but things in general.
It's like it's a complete disposition, I think. And it's like, it's connected with Tao and Taoism as well, I would say, because there's a huge sort of emphasis on the teachings of Taoism, which is implying that you can step back. There's literally verses in the Tao Te Ching about sort of step back from doing, allow things to unfold sometimes being, involved, and that's devalued, even though it's funny because, we all have an experience of that, because what do we do when we go to sleep? There's no time, actually, neurologically speaking, when your mind is more active than when you lie down and you're unconscious, which is always thinks quite paradoxical. So it's so essential to not do. And an analogy that I often use in therapy is to do with, a gardener and looking after a garden. Like, there's certain things that he's charged with doing, aspects of order that might be part of his role. Ultimately, what he needs to do, a large percentage of the time, is just let things do what they need to do and unfold as they unfold. His job is not to go over to each flower and tear open the petals. And if he did, he would ruin the entire process. And I think that in the West, the application of science and in many ways understanding the body. I mean, even treatments for certain mental health problems, and sort of pathologies in regards to things like serotonin uptake, SSRIs. If you look at some of the logic behind some of those things, it's fairly coarse. It's like, okay, there's too much excitatory, phenomena going on in that cortex. Let's calm it down. So my metaphor that I use sometimes when people ask me about medication is the brain's like an ecology of interaction. So neurons are all interacting with each other, massive, a huge scale in terms of number. So let's imagine a playground with primary school children in it. And average, there's 300, 350 children playing there. Now, if they start to fall over and cut their knee or something and get injured, you could identify the problem as, they're playing too much. So let's stop them from playing. And you would be guaranteed there'd be no more cut knees. But what's the real long-term result of 350 children that spend time together each day never playing? There's going to be a lot of negative fallout from it, right? Now, if they were falling off a wall and, endangering themselves to a horrendous degree, it might be worth stopping them from playing whilst that's right until you work out some other way. So I would say the same thing about a lot of medications. Like, yes, for some people, when the situation is that dire, it's worthwhile medicating them. But if you're just having some negative experience, I don't want to sort of trivialize people's experience of anxiety, but my point being is that it's just too readily applied, and the understanding and the implications of what those things can do to someone's mind and brain isn't necessarily, or at least historically, I'd say a long time ago, wasn't necessarily considered. It's just, these are the symptoms, let's stop the symptoms, without really having an appreciation of what it might do to someone.
Yeah, I mean, it can be quite lazy, can't it? It can be sort of, in terms of how a lot of doctors are at the moment, is very much, let's just give them some medication then, because it's far easier and quicker
than treating the underlying issues.
Yeah, and treating the person.
By your analogy, what you'd want to do is almost like teach the kids to play in such a way where they didn't fall and hurt the knee, or something like that.
Work out what's going on as a whole, rather than
whilst accepting that sometimes kids fall and hurt their knees.
Yeah. I mean, you can't avoid. I mean, it's going back to the suffering thing, isn't it? You can't avoid suffering because then you end up becoming too soft and actually not progressing.
This actually brings me on to the next myth I was going to ask you about, and that is a lot of people, when they think of Buddhism, they say, oh, Buddhism, isn't that just saying that life is suffering or life is sorrow and that kind of thing? Is that something that you hear a lot?
Yeah, all the time,
Is it true?
And no. It's so there's the four noble truths in Buddhism. So the first noble truth is referred to in English as truth of suffering. It doesn't say life is suffering. It says, and the Buddha said, you will not be able to not suffer whilst you're embodied in a human, well, in any form. It's inescapable. Suffering is inescapable. However, he didn't say life is, because there are teachings about, people being joyful and being happy, and those aren't things to necessarily avoid. There's a famous story of a family who were happy and reasonably joyful because after they lost a member of their family, and people were kind of, how can you be happy after you've just lost a member of your family? And they said, because every moment that we spent together was embraced, and we never really spoke bad words to each other, and we appreciate each other. But my point being is that was being told. That story is in the tradition, and a story that's told, a teaching story that's in Buddhism, to emphasize the fact, you can be happy and experience joy, and that's a good thing, by how you treat others. So if joy and happiness were seen as being meaningless in Buddhism, then it wouldn't be mentioned in stories like that. Suffering is seen as something that is unavoidable and needs to be accepted, really. So it's not it's not an indication that you're doing anything wrong, other than you haven't realized that you're a Buddha. Other than that, you're not failing at life because you're suffering. And again, there's a crossover into therapy. I'd say that's in the conversation I've had with clients, where they've come to the conclusion that there's something wrong with them because they're experiencing anxiety and depression. Whereas I would say, well, that's the nature of being an intelligent, awake human being that will have those experiences. Now, whether they become chronic and intense to the degree that you can't live is another question. To have experiences of anxiety and depression just means that you're not failing.
Yeah. And I mean, when we're talking about life being suffering and so on, it's ignoring what the opposite of that is, because within all things are contained their opposite. And so I guess if you're suffering, then you've got to know what joy is, or else you wouldn't know that you were suffering.
What's the poem? Your sorrow is the cup that is carved out to contain your joy. I can't remember, I'm paraphrasing, but basically the point being in the poem is that when you're crying or when you're sobbing for something, you're often sobbing in contrast and in relation to the amount of joy that you've experienced in some ways and what might have been lost, and vice versa. You can cry tears of joy, knowing, or reflecting back on how hard things have been in the past, and now we've come out and the grey skies have cleared, etc. Like often those experiences they're present at the same table in ways that suffering is not a failure. I don't mean go after it. Also, it's basically don't turn off. If we're using an analogy or a metaphor of driving down a motorway, if you suffer, that's not an indication that you should turn off services. Keep going.
Yeah.
I've also used that metaphor in meditation as well. People will often, I'm thinking too much, I'm not doing it right. It doesn't matter whether you're thinking. It's not the emphasis is not to stop your thoughts. The emphasis is to change your relationship.
Yeah, because again, it's people trying to imply, and when I say people, I mean me, trying to apply control, isn't it? It's that whole I must control everything. But it's hard.
Yeah.
I know that's a really obvious thing to say, but it's like, I think for a lot of people, like the instinct is, there's a problem, I must solve it, and I must solve it by using this method which will stop the pain, or whatever. But it's like you say, it's sometimes not that simple.
I would say that the thinking, to the degree that happens in, I don't like to just use the term the West necessarily. I would say nowadays it's much more, you could say, post-industrial society approach to life.
Okay.
Which is that thinking like that is a type of addiction.
Definitely,
if we're thinking about what an addiction is, often anxiety is called the sibling addiction, right? I mean, if you think about the act of moving towards and grasping at your particular, style of addiction is essentially, I'll do that to avoid this feeling that's present or coming up. So you move towards that as a way of masking the feeling or delaying the feeling that is coming up. Now, I'd say that anxiety is sometimes described as the sibling of addiction, because instead of looking for something that's stimulating dopamine, you go towards the problem-solving prefrontal cortex approach, which is, there's some way I can think my way out of this experience, and in order to avoid this experience, I'm going to use that part of my mind. And so people just will ping pong around in their head all day, all night, or whatever that is.
I was discussing this with a friend just today, because that characterizes me perfectly, because I sort of, if I find myself sort of feeling anxious or whatever, my instinct is, well, I know what, I'll just take on a big project, because that's bound to make me feel better, when actually what I'm doing is just crowding my mind out, because I'm addicted to that feeling of like, let's solve the next thing.
Yes.
Control, but also the problem solving. I need a problem to solve, because I can't solve the other ones. So I'll just get a new problem to solve, and then if I can't solve that one, I'll get a new problem to solve, and then you get these addictions. It's quite a powerful addiction, and it's not one because of the society that we're in, and it being a kind of capitalist society, and you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to have your hustle, you got to be up until 2 a.m. and then you got to get up at 5 a.m. when the sun's up, and then you got to exercise, and then you got to start like your pre-breakfast hustle, and all that sort of thing. It's almost encouraged, and that is very much the end game, I think, of late stage capitalism, when we're all dying of lack of sleep and desperate to do something which generates whatever, whether it be money, whether it be satisfaction, in air quotes, attention, or just dopamine release.
I definitely think that there's this sort of, it's also seen almost as exclusive as a state of being an awake human being. That's how it's almost perceived in the West.
Very much about Jayamanne.
If I'm awake, I have to be thinking. Otherwise, what would I be doing? How could I be aware of something unless I was thinking about it? And there is this sort of, it's sort of seen as synonymous with being aware, and I really don't, that's not my experience at all, that you can have all sorts of types of awareness without categorizing and putting it into, framing it in language. Now, of course, the part of our mind that does that will always do that. Like that, we can get neurological and say, your Broca's area and your Wernicke's area is always going to be, processing language and kind of suggesting terms and all the rest of it. Yes, it will, but that's not where you need to be, And that's the thing, is that there's this sense of identity that people have that's so fixed upon self-talk, and they're in a dialogue. So they think without it, that's Cartesian, right? I think, therefore I am, which I would say is like, in a sense, there's loads of nuanced, different interpretations of what he meant by that. But in a way, it doesn't even matter what Descartes meant by that. It matters how it was interpreted and absorbed by the people.
I mean, the implication's inescapable, isn't it, of what that is? It's there in the sentence itself.
Yes, exactly.
It's
yeah. So in a way, if he didn't mean that, it's his fault.
Yeah, he's got it wrong. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It kind of brings me on to the next thing I was going to ask you about, the next kind of myth, although I don't know how I'm going to phrase this one, but I'm just going to put it out there, the concept of the Tao. The Tao is nothingness, or the Tao is infinity, or the Tao is God, or the Tao is love. Mm-hmm. What for our listeners and for me and Buckley as well, what is the Tao in the best way that you can describe it? And I mean, obviously the answer is read the Tao Te Ching and that tells you what it is. But it's such an important concept. It's such a simple concept. And the problem with it is, which is kind of contained within the book itself, is that if you try and think and characterize it, you're already losing your grip of what it actually is.
Yeah. And it's, I'd say the same if you start to talk about the deeper aspects of Buddhism as well, is that you end up talking in paradox, talking nonsense with, and if I was going to sort of struggle to try and articulate what the Tao is, which, I suppose I would like to say as well that I don't consider myself to be an expert on either of these things. However, I have spent 35 years looking into it. That's all I would say. So what
it's longer than me. So I'll take your word on this.
And I'd say the Tao is what permits form and action, but it's not form and action. It's sometimes referred to as the Great Mother, and interestingly, Shunyata Buddhism, which means emptiness, not nothingness, emptiness, as in without form, is also referred to as the Great Mother, and often described in very similar ways to the Tao, or not exactly the same, very similar. And something to point out with that is that in China, free communist China, Taoist and Buddhist shrines and temples were often in the same building and often in the same room. It'd literally be the opposite ends of each room, and the person that looked after one would look after the other. So Taoism and Mahayana Buddhism especially, there's a huge overlap. So I would say that Taoism, personally, I would say that Taoism probably, if I was going to be a bit, whatever we could call it, kind of 1970s Californian about it, you could say it is love. It's formless, yet it permits all, yet it binds everything together. There's a verse in the Tao Te Ching that sort of says, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's essentially, if you screw up, and this is so counter to our experience of Western Christian traditions, right? If you screw up and make a mistake, you will be forgiven.
Wow.
Not you have to do this or you have to do that. You have to accept so and so as a bridge to God, and then you'll be forgiven. Blah 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 blah. It's just you'll be forgiven. That's it. There's no requirement. You'll be forgiven.
It's funny because you've mentioned there God as well. I think if I'm getting right what you were saying, in a kind of contrast to, as in the Christian view of, I'll just say I was raised Catholic. I say this in every episode, but every single episode, even when it's not relevant, I just say it anyway. Yeah. But there's a huge tradition of punishment in that. So even just to say it in the way that you phrased that, if you screw up, you will be forgiven. It feels weirdly liberating. It feels like suddenly, counter to everything that was instilled in me as a kid, that everything's going to be all right. And it's not a transaction. It's not something you have to qualify. It's something you have to work to. It's that you'll be forgiven. It's not it's not what you are. So why not?
And I would say I've seen that played out in people that are within and growing up in those traditions. People who've had family members murdered, campaigning for the release, or not, maybe not the release, but certainly, the not for the perpetrator to be executed and to be treated well. Like whatever anyone might say about, religion tries to control you and all that kind of stuff. Like real examples of people that have fully embodied that, the idea of punishment, all these ideas of punishment, retribution, qualifying yourself, etc. So much of that, I think, comes out of the Judeo-Christian framework.
Yeah.
And people see the Buddha like that. Oh, why? Sometimes people have said to me, they ask about karma or whatever, and they go, well, that's not fair. And I'm like, well, it's not designed. It's not about it being fair. It's literally just that this happens, then that happens. And it's just shit happens, man. That's in Buddhism.
When we're talking about God in contrast to Tao, since breaking out, because obviously I haven't practiced Catholicism for 20 years, but my mind is built on that framework. And particularly since starting Vayse, trying to move out of that closed framework whilst acknowledging the fact that it's always going to be there in me, there's always going to be that element instilled in me, is to try to understand the concept of God a bit better. And my concept of it moves closer towards the Tao. And that's one of the reasons I really enjoyed the Tao Te Ching. And the idea of, because I'm never, I believe in God. I'm never going to, not, I don't think, but I don't believe in the Christian idea of God anymore. I see it much more as this flow, this eternal thing, almost like you were saying, the Great Mother, but more like the position I'm shifting to is this idea of love, I guess. And, almost like, and I think we've talked about this before, Roger, like the background state of things is love, and the natural state when you take away indoctrination and dogmatism of a person is love and joy and happiness, which goes very much against what we were talking about, life being suffering and so on. I think that if you, I'm just repeating back to you something that you said to me before, but I think if you strip away a lot of these external influences, what you get closer to is this joy or happiness or this innate love, which is in all of us. But from what you're saying, I extrapolate that to be in everything.
Yeah, like it's the nature of everything is, and so much of that is to do with, well, let's say so much to do with the appreciation is to do with the perspective that we can have. So I think you can have an experience of phenomena where it's almost like that biscuit tin, that clock, and that remote control are arguing with each other about their position in space and time. This is like, there's an aggressive aspect to that with a negative perspective, with a self-loathing perspective, whereas a loving perspective and a let's say somebody has embodied that you were just describing, the negativity falls away and there's those inner qualities of positivity, love, connection, appreciation, empathy, etc. come out, then that gets reflected in the way that you perceive your environment. And I think that's a lesson that can often be learned with people, when they encounter psychedelics is, like the setting, you go in with a negative mindset or an angry mindset or people around you that are that way, and it can completely make your experience hellish. Yeah. But do the opposite and it can be, you can go to heaven, right? Temporarily, I would say. Not that that's a reason to do it every day, but
It's interesting you bring up the psychedelic thing, and obviously I guess there's kind of parallels there when you think about the idea of like, enlightenment and sort of the idea of, from my understanding of Buddha being someone who has seen through the illusion.
Yeah.
Is that, so seen through the illusion of and you hear that said about psychedelics as being, a means by which people can see through the illusion and see reality as it really is. So I wondered, with that in mind, what are your thoughts on simulation theory and the idea that we could be living in a simulation from the point of view of Buddhism? And because it seems to me that they're almost kind of similar, but then you think simulation theory implies that there was something which created the simulation, which perhaps is a bit at odds with.
Yeah, and it's kind of, there's an infinite regress of that, right? Like, so how would that ever end?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Yes, there's definitely. Okay, so my interpretation of the simulation theory is that it's basically the left hemisphere trying to work out what it stumbled upon as phenomena having an illusory quality. So, like the quantum physics and all the rest, all of the sort of like late and early 20th century, etc., has come to the conclusion that. Can I swear on here?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. We don't know what the fuck any of this is, right? So, like, we know how it acts on our level to some degree, and we know to some degree what composite parts are. But then if you start to look at the nature of those composite parts, where are they? We don't. There's some vague electrical field that we don't even really understand. So, I mean, and that, I'd say that's also a big part of Buddhist philosophy, is that you analyze phenomena in that same way in thought experiments, to the point where if you can't isolate one, how can you talk about many? If you don't understand if you can't actually identify a tree, if you go up to it in a forest, then how can you say you've got a forest? It's like none of it's here. It's a bit like going up to a tree in what's that game called that kids play? Minecraft, is it?
Yeah.
So, like, let's say ostensibly looks like a tree, but then when I go up to it, it's just made of pixels. And then what are those pixels made of? Made of light. And what are those? What's that light? It's just frequency of something. I don't really know what it is. So if I can't isolate that down as a tree, how can I say here's a forest? It's all sort of, it's empty, really. And that's one way of explaining what Buddhism is referring to as emptiness. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess what I'm interested in is like almost these kind of intersection points, and I think you answered it really well, because you brought up the quantum physics thing as well, and it's like there seems to be sort of a number of things kind of all meeting in like a similar conclusion. It's just that the Buddhists kind of got there first by a good number of centuries, things that we're only just kind of conceptualizing now. But that's assuming, I don't know. I mean, I currently feel like we live in a simulation. I don't know. I really feel like we do sometimes, but I don't know that, like you say, it could just be my interpretation based on.
Sorry. So that's where I went off track slightly. So yes, the simulation thing. I mean, in a way, from the point of view of Buddhism, it doesn't matter, because the simulation would have the same nature. The simulants, would that be the term? The people that are controlling the simulation, for instance, they would still be subject to the same nature of phenomena.
Yeah.
So just as an interesting kind of, it's not a science, but an interesting illustration, often this is used by younger Tibetan lama teachers to explain what is this kind of idea of this progressive path in Mahayana Buddhism, where you go on the first level of bodhisattvahood up to the 10th and then Buddhahood. So you go through all those. And the first level is often explained as, in the film The Matrix, Neo sees all the coding dropping down. That's supposed to be what they describe as synonymous with recognizing the nature of phenomena. Is like you suddenly see what it really is, and then of course that gave within the film, for instance, that gives him the ability to be able to manipulate it and be able to control it to some degree and control himself within that. And that is very much reflected in the accounts you hear about, various figures in Buddhist history that would put their hand through rock or knock on space and make it sound like tin, and fly around and do all this.
Is that an aim of Buddhism, though? Is to be able to control it? Is that an aim or a goal at all?
It's what's called siddhis in Sanskrit. Siddhis means accomplishments. But what it's really referring to is that they are side effects of the abilities that come with one-pointed focus and meditation. So, there's one-pointed focus, which is, said to bring all sorts of qualities, abilities. And then on top of that, being able to perceive the nature of phenomena more accurately, if you like, or more in line or aligned with how things really are, will give one abilities. And the other thing to say about that is that non-dualistic principle is often part, so that the what from the point of view of Buddhism is the fabricated perception, fabricated experience that you are separate from the outer elements becomes dissolved, so that your internal elements are connected to the external elements. And that means you can walk through fire and not be affected. You can fly, etc. So, obviously that sounds pretty wild.
Sounds
but
cool.
That's fine. It's just right.
Right. Okay. Yeah. There's lots of accounts, and I'm talking about modern accounts and odd things like, I'll say a couple of things about my own experience. I'd say I've definitely had, some people that know thinking, doing funny things that you wouldn't think would be possible, like reaching down a hole that's like 6 foot long with one arm and getting what's at the bottom of it.
And you've seen that happen?
Yeah.
Wow.
So obviously you can't see it, right? And I think often they do, because there's quite strict rules about what you're not supposed to show and talk about in public. Obviously you can't see. I couldn't see his arm, right? So I can't see that his arm did go 6 foot long. But what else is there to think? Like if someone reaches down the hole and their arm's 3 foot long, probably the longest. You say that's pretty long for an arm. Other things like, I get the feeling that your channel is kind of partly to do with this sort of thing. So I'll just throw in a couple of things. I remember one time driving a lama to the airport. He's quite famous for what's called yogic song. So he would spring into spontaneous yogic song. And they'd be like teachings. He'd be sort of teaching as he's singing, but just come out. He's very eccentric kind of character as well. He'd be talking, he'd be teaching. And this is like he's a Kempo. A Kempo is like someone who's basically like a doctor of philosophy in Buddhism, and to a insanely highly studied degree. So they won't have text with them to teach. They'll just talk about and say verse. We're talking huge text. And they'll say verse this, line that, and they know exactly what it says, and they'll teach like. And that's not even what I'm about to talk about. So anyway, I was driving into an airport at 3 a.m, he's doing his yogic songs. And in Tibetan Buddhism, these beings called mamos, and they protectors and messengers, let's say sort of interdimensional beings to some degree. And I noticed when I look out the window that there was a barn owl. The barn owls are the white ones. So they're basically white, aren't they? With I know like tan on. Yeah. And he was flying next to the car, because this was on the way to Edinburgh Airport, I believe, if I remember rightly. I'm talking sort of 25 years ago. But, so it was quite a lot of windy country roads in the Scottish, lowlands.
Yeah.
And then I noticed there was none on the other side of it. And by the time he sort of finished his song, there were like 5 owls flying next to the car. And he's just laughing, going, yeah. That's what he kept saying. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And that was it.
We've had some like cool stories on this podcast, but that's been one of my favorite. Definitely. That's like, wow, that's so cool. One owl. That'd be fine. But
they were like,
owls,
it was like a community.
I mean, that's irrefutable, isn't it? Just count the owls.
I was like kind of driving, looking at it, like, what is going on? But it was. I ended up.
Yeah, you can't science.
I ended up just sitting there laughing, driving down the road. Didn't know what else to think, really. Other than this is just got so bizarre, and because he was quite a bizarre character, like, he'd be teaching, and he'd sometimes just stop and look up and go, yeah, and then carry on as if someone was talking to him. And I'm not saying that's what was happening. Maybe the owls are like communicating. Many things like that. I mean, there's a teacher that's around at the moment. He's quite famous, quite well known. He's on the sort of, because he's quite young. He's my age, and I remember he came out for a ceremony, and they wear these for certain ceremonies and initiations. There's like a black mask worn, so you can't see through it. This was relatively in public. I mean, it was on the grounds of a monastery, but it was relatively public. And they put this kind of kindling setup quite a long way. I'd say certainly wasn't less than 50 meters. It was probably more. And he sat on this sort of Tibetan style chair side in the grounds of the monastery, and they pass him this bow and arrow, like traditional Tibetan bow and arrow, and they light the end, a flaming arrow, and he had it down sort of, they lit it as, the guy crouched next to him, so they lit it with him pointing it at the ground, and he, without hesitation, just lifted it and went, like flung it off straight into the fireplace.
Wow.
With no, there was no moment to calculate it or think, better than any Olympic archer I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Like lots of things like that.
Yeah, it just sounds like some kind of
like using the force.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, he was quite a character. He ran off into the Himalayas for years without. He just went and just lived in sub-zero conditions for quite a few years.
He's living the dream.
Yeah,
he's practicing with his bow and arrow. So, Roger, when you talk about Buddhism, it makes me want to drop everything straight away and just become a Buddhist myself. So if any of our listeners actually want to do that, what is the best way for them to start that journey or that quest today? I mean, we're talking about whether there's any books you can recommend, documentaries or movies, TV shows, music or podcasts, or whether there's any practices they can pick up easily, meditation practices, what's the best place to get those, or do they just seek out a monastery themselves, or how would you recommend people get their toes wet?
I would probably say, in some ways, I'd probably say to what to avoid.
Okay.
I know it sounds a bit negative. What I would avoid is, one, just jumping in too soon and going, right, I'm going to be a this type of this, and that's me, done. And I also highly recommend that people don't become monks and nuns. Now, when I say that, the reason I say that is because if someone's going to do it, they should do it regardless of whether I highly recommend it or not. Right. So don't do it because anyone is expecting you to. Don't do it because you think it's going to do anything for you or bring you anything. Now, one of the reasons I'd say that is because you don't need to do that it's not the only way to practice, and it's not the only way to do extreme practice as well. You could go to a retreat center and somewhere, wherever it happens to be. It doesn't have to be in Asia somewhere, and for months, and not necessarily be a monk or a nun. The one thing I would say is be very aware that every tradition thinks it's the tradition. The other thing I would say is, and I'd be keen to say this in some ways, is that I don't think that other traditions don't have a lot of these things going on in them. But I do think that they won't necessarily have them going on in some of the more, let's call them, conventional manifestations. Like I think that Christianity, for instance, if mystical is a word to use, I don't know, whatever we call it, spiritual, has a deep understanding and awareness of spiritual realms. I remember seeing an Egyptian caveman being interviewed once. He said, "You all think we're out here having this peaceful time." He said, "This is war. This is war. We struggle every day." But the way I feel like I might know a little bit about what he means by that struggle, and it won't be, it's not just struggling with memories of childhood or whatever, it's deep, it's elemental, I suppose. But I think it's useful to read books, but I wouldn't get too obsessed with them as well. I mean, that'd be the other warning, is don't kind of just read your head off, so to speak. Really do make an effort to get a daily practice, even if it's very short. Just, meditation, that's not the word that's used in Buddhism. For instance, the Tibetan word for Gom. Gom means to familiarize. You familiarize yourself with that state. But what I would say is you're familiarizing yourself with uncertainty. You're letting go of form. You're becoming familiar with letting go of form, and that's really important.
When I was doing the meditation retreat of yours that I came along to, it was the formless meditation that gave me the most powerful experiences, and that was the one that I actually talked about on Spirit Box, which is Dara Mason's podcast. When I found myself just in that short time, I mean, I don't know how long it was. I'm guessing 10 minutes or 5 minutes. I found myself in a whole different room with a whole different setup, and with a shadowy dark man character there talking to me, touching me rather than talking to me. And that was all just from meditating without form, like without a mantra, without even holding on to my breath or anything like that. That was just letting go. I've tried it again since, and I haven't managed it outside of that environment, but I felt that experience really gave a taste of what that kind of formless experience is.
I mean, I think when you're letting go of that familiar style of thinking and problem solving mind, then all sorts of experiences can come up that were probably there in a sense, if you see what I mean. Like they get liberated or kind of uncovered, and the challenge is in some ways to keep on letting go, because if we turn an experience into another form, then we've limited ourselves. So, it's allowing things to be and letting things be, letting things go.
If people out there haven't meditated before, what's a good style for them to start with?
Everyone's going to be familiar with things like following the breath, body scanning. If anyone doesn't know what body scanning is, it's essentially just moving your awareness around the body. I'd say if you're going to sit and meditate, then don't underestimate the body in terms of its inclusion in that. So what I mean by that is a key sometimes, and that's why mindfulness is really an important support to meditation, to life, is that the key to letting go of kind of problem solving, cerebral kind of processing in terms of being occupied is to bring our awareness more into the body. And of course, that's partly what the breathing is doing. I would say beyond just the breathing aspect of the body, it's also being aware of your body in a more holistic sense, just your breathing. And also that instead of seeking to do anything with your breath, you're just trying to find your natural breath. I'm not saying that's never got any value to it. Obviously, breath control is useful, but in terms of meditation and doing it as a foundational practice, some specific practice that's got certain goals in mind, if you're looking to understand your mind and your own, and let's call it achieving peace or serenity, then it's more and more seeking ways. Okay, in fact, I use a phrase which is often the key, I would say, which is to rest in the uncontrived state. Now that sounds simple, but it's like the most ultimate level of meditation there is. But that doesn't mean it's got no value when people are starting. So seeking whatever you can do to get closer to what you could describe to yourself as being uncontrived. So that's with your breath, with your mind state, with your body, etc. So of course there's certain forms to the way you sit, which is important. So that I'm not saying just like flop out on the sofa, just say, yeah, I'm meditating, man, and not do anything. I mean, have a certain type of reasonably straight back, but not like stiff and rigid, but just, there should be a very vague S shape to your spine, really, if you're kind of sitting properly. I mean, naturally for a human being, I don't mean like just meditate. And just allow your awareness to be there. There's a lot of emphasis I put on allowance rather than being strict and trying to make yourself do something. It's more a sense of allowing yourself to be where you are. Allow yourself to be in the moment, allow your body to be what it is. And if you've got anxiety, this is a big one actually. So if you've got a sense of anxiety, if you've got a sense of, I just can't sit, my mind's going all over the place, I'm worrying about this, I'm worrying about that, allow that as well. Because if you can allow that, there's only one way that can work. And that's if there's a mind that's bigger than all of that frenetic energy and activity. It's allowing it. But you can't allow yourself to be like that unless there's something bigger that can contain that experience. That's what you're tuning into. You're tuning into the part of your mind that's bigger than all of those experiences. Don't try and get rid of them. Give that wild horse a big field. Don't try and tie it down.
Yeah, I really like that. A lot of what you were saying reminded me of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is a book that you'd recommended to me by Shunryu Suzuki. And that has that whole thing about each time you sit down to Zazen, which I think is what they call it in that tradition, it's like it's the first time. And if you think that it's not, and if you think you're getting good at it or getting better at it, then you're actually getting further away from what it really is, which is just to kind of sit there each time like it's the first time, which I really like that idea. Can you recommend any other books that you think? I know that you said not to get too caught up in books, but can you think of any that are sort of essential for, or I mean, we've talked about the Tao Te Ching, we've talked about Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
Yeah.
You mentioned a bit about hemispheres. I'm reading on your recommendation as well. The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, which I'm really enjoying. There's, a lot of the story of the Buddha is in Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse as well. Is there anything else that you would think would be really good reading for anyone who's interested in this?
I would say Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and there's also not. Hang on, it's going to be a confusing sentence. Additionally, there's another book called Not Always So, by the same. It's Shunryu Suzuki, right? So he gave talks. So these books are, each chapter is essentially a short talk that he would give. Most chapters are normally about 8 or 9 pages.
Yeah.
But they're very pithy, very profound, profound in their simplicity, but also profound. I'd say they are great companions to sitting in general. If someone really wants to get into, let's say, the interface between the philosophy of Buddhism and the practice, then there's a book called The Sun of Wisdom, as in S-U-N, by Khenpo Sultrim. And that's a commentary on a traditional text called the Prajnaparamitas. Prajnaparamita, translated, really means wisdom that's gone beyond, transcendental wisdom. And it's quite an analytical book, an analytical text. But the purpose of the Prajnaparamita, and the reason it's called the Prajnaparamita, is because it's meant, the intention is that it takes your intellect to a point where it's nowhere else to go. So emptiness is now the only place to go. So it's kind of designed that you read it and then you meditate, you read it and then you meditate. And it's very practical. It's analysis of things like fire, movement, wood, burning, time, all elemental kind of experiences that everyone will have. So it's not, there's a few esoteric aspects like Buddhism. Mostly it's analysis of phenomena and experiences and then reflecting on what the nature of those things are. And then you there's guidance within the book as well. He's made way more.
Fantastic.
I think that's could be a life changer, I think. Especially if someone's quite analytical and heady. If anyone's into philosophy, then there's a lot of crossover between that and Zeno's paradoxes, the ancient Greek philosophy.
Incredible. Well, thank you very much. And if people want to find you, do you have a website or any social media presence or anything like that?
Yeah, I've got. I mean, I guess you have like a description thing underneath when you post.
Yeah, we'll do show notes for all this. Yeah.
So
Keith will. Yeah.
Keith will.
Right. Okay.
We've got a guy.
I've got a website called. It's actually just being rebuilt. I'm getting it redone because it needs rejigging a bit. So that's Jaya Counselling. Okay. I'm also about to do your kind of thing as well. I have done a few solo videos, but I've got I suppose what I'd call a podcast YouTube channel called The Wellbeing Evolution. And I would emphasize it's the Wellbeing Evolution because there's a pretender to my throne. I can't even remember what they do. I think it's to do with nutrition or something, and I think they're called Wellbeing Evolution. So I'm the Wellbeing, and it's that's it. Yeah, and it's specifically to do with the crossover between philosophy and spirituality, like especially Eastern sort of mysticism, I suppose, and sort of the therapeutic approach and therapeutic experiences. And there's also an Instagram page as well. What I would say is they're both in quite a nascent sort of level. So I'm just getting to the point where I'm trying to make slightly better recordings and things like. There's a few things on there that I've got. It's content. It's me talking, but it's just me in a sort of fairly bog standard background talk. Phone.
Excellent. Oh, sounds really good. I didn't know about that. Yes, so I'll search that out. And if people want to find more of Vayse, you can get us on Twitter or Instagram. That's at Vayse and then Vayse spelled backwards. So that's at VAYSEESYAV. You can get us at www.vayse.uk, which is also the place that you can get the complete unabridged show notes. That is the best place to go for the show notes. But you can actually find us on all the major podcasting platforms. You can email us on vayse.info@gmail.com with any of your own experiences or ideas or anything that you'd like to bring to our attention. You can get the soundtrack on Bandcamp, which is done by our very own Stephen James Buckley here under the name Polypause, and any money that he gets from that he kindly puts back into the podcast. And if you have any spare cash that you'd like to throw away, we have a Ko-Fi. You can donate as much or as little as you want, but if you give us a monthly donation, you can join our Discord server, which is a lovely place to be. So thank you very, very much, Roger. Really, really appreciate your time. And as always, I've learnt loads. Pleasure. And I'm sure everyone else has as well.
Yeah. So just obviously before you go, just something's been troubling me, and I just thought I ought to ask. Imagine, right? So the one day you're sat in your house, and in fact one evening, so it's dark. It's a dark November evening. You sat in your house.
I'm imagining that now. Yeah.
Imagine just picture it now in your mind's eye. And you hear a strange humming noise, and there's a light in the sky. Okay. Yes. And the light comes towards you, and you're like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" It's a helicopter, right? It's the Dalai Lama's official helicopter. And he comes out of his helicopter. The helicopter lands in your garden or area of wherever you are. Yes. And the Dalai Lama comes out with his entourage and knocks on your door. And he's like, "Roger, what's up? I'm around for a few days. Mm-hmm. What would you like to do?" And what would you do with the Dalai Lama for a day? If you had a day to sort of hang out with him, what would you like to do with him? And this could be a serious answer or not. You know, I'm not going to impose my control over you. What would you like to do?
I think I'd probably like to walk about with him a bit. If I assume he's just about still mobile, chat quite a bit. I'd probably like to show him a couple of films.
What films would you show him? There we go. We're getting to the root of it now.
I think that there's a couple of films that I really like. One of them's called Bartleby.
I've heard of it. I've not seen it. I've heard of it.
Well, they remade that, I think, about 15 years ago, maybe a bit less. So it's an old Herman Melville story, the novella. But they it was made in 1972, I believe, and it had Paul Schofield played Sir Thomas More in Man for All Seasons. He's not the title character, and it's just feel it's very profound. And I think from my own personal perspective, it's quite nostalgic. It's 1970s London, which is my infant life, was some sort of echoes there of my own early years. And I really like My Dinner with Andre. I don't know if you've heard. So it doesn't even really need to be a film, really. That play, because it's basically restaurants, and it covers a lot. It's got a really nice arc. He's quite resistant to going for this meal with this guy that he used to know, and he's kind of goes half-heartedly. And by the time he leaves, he's had a transformative experience through this interaction with this. And the guy's been traveling around the world. He used to be a theatre director. It's not that he's like full of pithy wisdom. It's more that he generates all these kind of questions about life and his experience and the way he's seen the world and what is life, etc. And he leaves the other character just going home really quite dazed and expecting, and it's got a lot of pathos to it, a lot of pathos, especially towards the end.
It's opened up this whole new world of possibilities that I hadn't even thought of watching films with the Dalai Lama. Because I bet he loves a comedy, right? So like, I'd love to watch something like Ghostbusters with him and just sit him down and just say like, Mr. Lama, get a load of this.
And you know what? Like, after hearing the way that you talked about them two films, I feel like I really hope this happens for you now.
Yeah, I've got my fingers crossed.